heresy for a minute, because I haven't been talking about it all year at all. Heresy is basically deception. It's taking truth and turning it into lies and turning it into false teaching. And it was happening a lot in the days of the New Testament, especially, now, of course it is, but even when there were people alive that saw Jesus, there was still rumors and lies going around about him. And Paul had to deal with a lot of false teachings as well, especially people trying to circulate letters claiming they were written by Paul. And that happened a lot. Because as soon as you put a celebrity's name on a quote, it becomes powerful. Now, I know, John, you don't have a lot of experience on the social media world. Good. Probably none of us, probably all should be less on there. But as far as things go, and you wouldn't be watching YouTube if you weren't in the social media world. But anyhow, as soon as people post pictures of quotes and they'll post pictures of celebrities who may or may not have actually said those things. But because the celebrity's picture is behind it, the quote has a different standing. Or a different, it holds differently. So when people would write letters, they would pretend they were from Paul to get people thinking that they were real or based on truth and reality. These days, there's a lot of heretical teaching going around the church that Paul's letters are not important or not relevant. They try to discredit Paul, which is ludicrous. Because as we get into the letters that were written by him, we really see how much truth there is to our faith and the foundation of Christianity as it is. And I'm going to get to Romans and Corinthians and all of them. And they just continually pound on that reality that Jesus Christ died and rose again. That's the foundation of the Christian faith, period. If you don't like it, then you wouldn't be watching this video, because this video is for people that want to know more about the Bible, want to explore with me, and it's for John, my best friend, who lives 2,000 miles away, who I want to keep in contact with and keep our Bible studies going, and as well as other people like Ron and Rick and Ben and hundreds of people that I hope are watching or will be watching, because we get into here and we just have to kind of shoot through the rest of the book of Acts as much as we can, because there's just so much of what Paul did throughout his missionary journeys, that constantly telling people about Jesus and constantly getting rejected by people, mobbed, beaten nearly to death, probably even did die, and Jesus rose him up again. I'm not sure, but it's pretty interesting. Chapter 14, he's in the city of Iconium, and then there's Lystra, Derbe. Got to get a good map and follow where he's going. And he was in this one temple, near a temple, Romans and Greeks. Remember I talked about, I was reading Percy Jackson, the Lightning Thief, and how I believe a lot of those myths come from real spiritual darkness and powers and everything. Well, Paul's in that world right there. He was among the people that believed in Zeus and Hermes and Aphrodite and all of these people. And, they believed in these things, and there was a statue to this unknown God. So Paul used that as a stepping stone. He didn't go through and go, you need to cast all these idols to the ground, blah, 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 this and that. You deal with that afterward, right? This is a picture of a heart. Okay? Pieces of a heart all put together in one. God doesn't want just a piece of us. He wants the whole thing. And then once he has us, he'll start taking care of all the things that we need to change or to work on in our lives. And that's a constant process. It's called sanctification. It's a constant process Christians are going through. We are not perfect, but we follow someone who is perfect. So as we follow him, we're to be made more like him. Chapter 15 is the big debate about the circumcision and about being saved by grace. I love this because they're standing up there talking about how the Gentiles have been saved by grace. We believe that we, the Jews, are saved by grace of the Lord Jesus Christ in the same way as they are. James gets up there and starts, gives them a little message as well, constantly telling them about God's grace to his people, the Jews and the Gentiles, saving them both, bringing them both into the flock. Now, we get into more of that. We're not going to go into that all in detail right now. I love the end of chapter 15, though, because that's where Paul is preaching one night in this, like, third-story building, which is kind of interesting. And he's preaching into midnight, and one of the people is sitting in the windowsill and nods off and falls asleep while Paul is preaching. That's great. And, of course, he falls to the ground and dies, and Paul goes downstairs and raises him up and then goes back upstairs and continues on preaching. It's like, oh, yeah, and by the way, and message number 3. It's like, just brings him back to life. Like, really? And the end of chapter 15 is where I was talking to you last time about how there was some division because Barnabas wanted to go on another missionary trip with Paul, and he wanted to take John Mark, and Paul didn't want to take him because he abandoned them last time. He said, I'm done. I don't have to do this. I've got other things I can do. I'd rather not, do this missionary stuff. It's not for me. He was a rich kid. He was stubborn. Very likely the rich young ruler that came to Jesus and asked him, what do I need to do to be saved? And he says, go sell everything you have. Well, that was hard for him to do because he had a lot of things. Possibly. Anyhow, chapters 15, verse 36 to chapter 18, verse 22 is Paul's second missionary journey. This is a map of the Mediterranean Sea. Oh, the Mediterranean Sea and everything around it, obviously. But anyhow, you can just look it up. Get an idea of where he's going, because there's all these cities mentioned that are... Some of them are still there, some of them are in ruins, and you can explore and discover things as you go, but it's pretty cool. Somewhere in the middle of chapter 16, you see the pronoun now is we, Luke, the author, is joining. So anytime he starts, you see we sought to go to Macedonia, or we went outside the gate, or what happened is we were going to the place of prayer, that Luke is there now with them. And he comes and goes. It's there and then it's not. And the beginning of chapter 16 is where Paul comes to Derbe and Lystra and meets Timothy, the son of a Jewish woman who was a believer, but his father was Greek. And of course, Timothy ends up being very, very important. He, the latter half of his life was very likely a bishop or pastor of the Ephesians church. Anyhow, Paul, and he's very young when Paul brings him on as a protege, to teach him as a student, to raise him up, to teach him about Christ, and to teach him how to teach others. What interests me is how the Holy Spirit constantly directs Paul throughout his journeys. And as they're going, they find they like to go to the synagogues because that's where the people are, where they can ask questions and talk about Jesus. When there's not a synagogue, they usually meet down by the river, so that's pretty cool. And I like how verse 16 of chapter 16 it says, "It happened that as we were going to the place of prayer," see, we all need a place of prayer. We all need to get deeper into our prayer lives. And I've, especially as I've been reading through this year, have been seeking more and more a place of prayer for myself, just to get alone with God and to be there. They come about and they beat Paul, and of course he throws up his Roman citizenship anytime he gets beaten up. He's like, "You guys can't do this to me. I'm a Roman citizen." And they're like, "Well, we paid for our Roman citizenship." And he's like, "Well, I'm born a Roman." And very, very important that in that culture, being a Roman citizen held to a lot. When you weren't, you could get treated like whatever. They wouldn't care. But at the end of chapter 16 is they're in prison. Paul and Silas are in prison, and they start to worship. And the gates are opened, and everyone is able to get out, but no one leaves because they're so busy worshiping. There was an earthquake, and God brings salvation to them, to the jailer, who's thinking that all of his prisoners just escaped, and he's going to be responsible for taking care of the debts of all of them, because in that period of time in Rome, when you were in prison, you had a certificate of debt. When you got out of prison, when you served your time, they would stamp it with paid in full to Telestai. It is finished, right? It is finished. So your debt was paid in full. So if all of these prisoners had escaped the jailer would have been responsible for fulfilling all of the debt of all those prisoners. See? That's the end of there where he talks about being a citizen of Rome, but he thinks he would have been responsible for that. Now, think back to Jesus on the cross, when he was paying the debt for us. He said, "It is finished." This is his last words. It is finished. And it's just that. Our debt is paid in full. That's the end of chapter 16. That's where I'm going to stop, because I just want you to think about that. You and our debt's been paid in full. Everything we do now is to bring edification to the church and to help the world to see God's love. Everything we do from this time forward is not to earn a salvation or anything like that. And I will hammer away at that for the rest of the New Testament. That is all about doing things for Him because He loves us. Not because we're trying to earn something. Because you can't. Our debt has been paid in full.